Imagine this. A general stands before his entire army and gives an order that leaves every soldier stunned. Tonight, no one fires a single shot. Ahead of them stands one of the British Empire's strongest fortresses, a position everyone believes is impossible to capture. Yet within minutes, it will be in American hands. But the real question is, why would a general order his own men to keep their guns silent? And how did that seemingly impossible decision become the greatest victory of his life? Midnight, the 15th of July, 1779. General Anthony Wayne walks down the line of his own men and gives them an order that should never work in war. Unload your muskets, pull the flints if you have to. Tonight, the only weapon anyone carries is a bayonet, and if any man fires his gun before the fort is taken, Wayne tells them flatly, the man behind him has permission to run him through. 1,200 British soldiers are sitting inside a fortress they call Little Gibraltar, a position so strong, on cliffs so steep, surrounded by so much water and marsh, that nobody in the British High Command believes it can be taken by a direct assault. 20 minutes from now, it will fall, and not one American musket will fire until it's already over. To understand why this particular night mattered so much to Anthony Wayne, why he built an entire battle plan around silence and bayonets instead of gunpowder, you have to go back 2 years to the worst night of his career. Because this wasn't the first time bayonets in the dark decided something for him. The first time, he was the one who got caught. September 1777, Wayne and roughly 1,500 Continental troops were camped near Paoli, Pennsylvania, confident they were screened and safe behind a line of pickets. A British force under General Charles Grey had other ideas. Grey gave an order that horrified even some of his own men. Pull the flints from every musket. No gunfire, no warning shots. Just steel in the dark against men who were asleep. It worked exactly as designed. British soldiers swept into the American camp in near total silence. Tents were torn open at bayonet point. Dozens of Wayne's men were killed before most of them understood what was happening. Some allegedly stabbed where they lay. American newspapers exploded with outrage the next morning, and a lot of it landed on Anthony Wayne. How had he let this happen on his watch? Wayne demanded a court-martial to clear his name, an almost unheard-of move for an officer to request against himself. The court ruled he had acted with a high degree of prudence and cleared him completely. But paper doesn't erase the way a room goes quiet when your name comes up. The sting of Paoli followed him for years. Somewhere in that same period, the nickname was born that stuck for the rest of his life, Mad Anthony. He kept fighting. He held the line at Brandywine, stood firm through the brutal heat of Monmouth in June 1778, and slowly rebuilt a reputation, not as the general who got surprised at Paoli, but as one of the most fearless commanders Washington had. By the summer of 1779, though, reputation wasn't enough. The war in the north had ground into a stalemate. Nobody knew how to break, morale was cratering, and Washington needed something the newspapers could actually print. He found it 40 miles up the Hudson River on a rocky peninsula the British had spent months turning into one of the most heavily fortified positions on the entire continent. Picture it. Stony Point sits on high ground, with water on 3 sides, guarded by marsh that turns to mud at low tide. Behind that are rows of sharpened logs called abatis, layered like a wall of spears. Behind that are cannon, trenches, and 1,200 British regulars who genuinely believed nobody could reach them without being cut apart first. The British called it Little Gibraltar. Washington looked at the same position and saw an opportunity nobody would expect him to take. He handed the job to the one general obsessive enough and honestly unhinged enough to actually attempt it. Wayne took command of a newly formed corps of light infantry, roughly 1,300 hand-picked men, and planned the attack the way he planned everything, personally and down to the smallest detail. He scouted the terrain himself in disguise, close enough to sketch the defenses by hand. He timed the tides for weeks because the plan depended on hitting the marsh exactly when it was shallow enough to wade through without being seen. He split his force into 2 silent flanking columns, muskets unloaded and bayonets only, while a smaller center column carried loaded weapons whose only job was to make noise and pull attention away from the real attack. And here's a detail that almost sounds too good to be fiction. Local legend has it that the British commander of the fort, Lieutenant Colonel Henry Johnson, wasn't even inside Stony Point that night. According to the story that's been told and retold for 2 centuries, he was several miles away having dinner with a loyalist widow, entirely unaware that the impregnable fortress under his command was about to be taken without him. Wayne asked for volunteers to go in first, the forlorn hope. 20 men per column whose job was to hack through the wooden defenses under direct fire before anyone else could move an inch. Historically, this was close to a suicide assignment. He offered cash out of his own pocket to the first men over the wall. He got more volunteers than he needed. At midnight, the columns moved through the marsh in total darkness, water at their waists, bayonets already fixed. British sentries heard something, fired blindly, and hit nothing but water and mud. By the time the first Americans reached the log defenses and started cutting through under fire, the alarm inside the fort was already ringing, and it no longer mattered. It was too late. The flanking columns hit both sides of the fort at almost the same moment, bayonets first, and the fighting turned into chaos in the dark, hand to hand, with British defenders unable to tell how many attackers they were actually facing. Leading one column was French volunteer officer Lieutenant Colonel François de Fleury, who had specifically requested the most dangerous post in the entire assault. He was the first man over the wall, and with his own hands he tore down the British flag flying above the fort, a moment so celebrated afterward that Congress struck a special medal just for him, one of only a handful ever given to a foreign officer during the entire war. Major John Stewart, leading the second column, was right behind him and received the same honor. Partway through the fighting, a musket ball grazed Anthony Wayne across the top of the skull. He dropped, certain in that first second that it was fatal. According to the officers who were with him that night, he ordered his aides to carry him forward anyway, telling them he wanted to die at the head of his men inside the fort he'd spent months planning to take. He didn't die. Within minutes, he was back on his feet, blood running down the side of his face, directing the final push as his men cleared the last defenders off the walls. It was over in under 30 minutes. British losses were roughly 63 killed and more than 540 captured. American losses were around 15 killed and 80 wounded. A wildly lopsided result for what should have been one of the hardest assaults of the entire war. That night, Wayne scrawled a note to Washington that has survived word for word for almost 250 years. The fort and garrison with Colonel Johnson are ours. In New York, British Commander Henry Clinton was reportedly stunned that a position his engineers called nearly impregnable had fallen in a single night without so much as a warning bombardment. The Americans held Stony Point only a few days before pulling back. Everyone in the planning room already knew it wasn't defensible long-term, but that was never the point. Congress voted Wayne one of only 8 gold medals awarded to American officers during the entire war, and news of the assault reached the French court, reassuring an already nervous ally that the Continental Army could still pull off something this disciplined under the worst conditions. For an army that had spent most of 1,779 losing ground and burying men, Stony Point was proof of life. And here is the part worth sitting with for a second. The tactic that broke Anthony Wayne at Paoli, total silence, total darkness, bayonets only, no warning shots, is the exact same tactic he used 2 years later to become one of the most celebrated officers in the entire Continental Army. He didn't invent a new way to win. He took the worst night of his career, the one that got his name dragged through every newspaper in the colonies, and turned it into the sharpest weapon he owned. Most people who survive a disaster spend the rest of their lives avoiding anything that looks like it. Wayne studied his instead, memorized every piece of it, and used it on the people who taught it to him first. He kept fighting through Yorktown and the final years of the war. Then, in his later life, he did something almost nobody remembers him for today. In 1792, with the brand new United States barely a decade old, Washington called him out of retirement one last time. This time, it was to rebuild an American army that had just suffered its worst defeat ever against Native American forces in the Northwest Territory, a disaster so catastrophic it nearly ended the U.S. Army before it had really begun. Wayne spent almost 2 years drilling a new force from scratch, refusing to move a single mile before he was certain his men were ready, and led them to a decisive victory at Fallen Timbers in 1794 that reshaped the entire American frontier and forced a lasting peace. He died 2 years later, in 1796, at a lonely outpost in Erie, Pennsylvania, still in uniform, still on duty, 41 years, almost to the week, after a night in Pennsylvania first taught him exactly what silence and a bayonet were capable of. If you made it this far, that probably means this channel is your kind of history. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Drop a like if you enjoyed the story, and tell me in the comments which overlooked battle deserves its own deep dive next.